are listening to Setting History Straight with Linda Watson on Hebrew Nation Radio.
And now what we're going to cover is the end time scenario. And I'm just saying, I'm going to pick some dates here. They're arbitrary. Now, the Father has timelines, and everybody says, well, he can cut time shorted. And yes, he can, but he's not going to cut his timeline short. He can move them around, but he can't cut them short. Do y'all understand that? Because he's already written it in. So the timelines must stay there. And so we know some of these timelines. We're very familiar with some of these timelines, and they can move, the way the Father wants them to. Now we know that he says in Hosea chapter 6 that 2 days, and then I'm going to raise you up. Well, 2 days would also represent 2,000 years. We're told that in 2 Peter, right? 2 Peter says a day is as 1,000 years. So what he's saying to us is from his time that he came, which was probably around 30 AD, somewhere around that time frame. If you count forward 2,000 years, I have to come back by 2030. So that's what he's really saying. That's his latest time that he can come back. And that is really an easy thing to see, especially when you're paying attention to events today, right? So let's get started on this. There's two main timelines in Daniel. And one of them, the two timelines, the first one is the tree that falls in Daniel. So in Daniel, you have this tree that gets chopped down. In the beginning, at that time, that was Nebuchadnezzar. We're told that Nebuchadnezzar falls and he represented the king of Babylon. He goes into 7 years of madness, okay? Well, I think that is a prophecy for Babylon, the symbolic Babylon, and that, you have 7 years of madness. I think that madness, I can see that it started somewhere around the time Trump went into office, maybe a little bit before, a little after, but sometime around that time, I think you've seen nothing but people losing their mind in this country, just absolutely losing their mind. It's just been the most incredible thing. And the best way you can describe what's been going on in the last 3 or 4 years is madness. Now, I believe that is the fall, just like the tree fell, that is the fall of Israel, because all of those prophecies in the book of Daniel are written for the end time, everything. It's all written for the end time. So there's 7 years of madness, and I think that's talking about Israel. And if you look at what's going on in Australia, these people have truly lost their minds. And Israel representing the Christian nations, and that's who they represent, right? So when you start looking through those nations, you see, the people have lost their minds. They truly have lost their minds. So the fall of this tree, if it started around that same time frame that Trump came in, that would have been around 2017, right? That's when he went into office. So now you begin to see these 7 years of craziness going on in our country, and I think that will continue. If that continues for 7 years, it'll continue to her fall. Do y'all see that? And, this is what we're talking about. Babylon becomes mad for 7 years. I think Babylon is America. We've all talked about that. If you read Jeremiah 50 and 51, she is that nation, right? That is the hammer of the earth. In Isaiah 47, it talks about the symbolic Babylon that rises. And Jeremiah 50 and 51, she is the nation with the hammer. And so she is the policeman of the earth. That can only be one place, and that's America. And she has truly lost her mind at this point. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. Now, this could have happened in the middle of that time frame in 2027, from the time of the Virgo constellation. You had the Virgo constellation on September 23rd, 2017. That's a marker, but it showed this little baby being born. And I believe that's the birth of the people in this country that the Father is working with, and he's beginning to move them and wake them up spiritually. I think there's 1/3 that's easy to find in when you read Zechariah chapter 11, he talks about, in 13, he talks about 1/3 of the people will call me by my name, their Father, and I will call them my children, which is what we're talking about. The end result of all of this is going to be 1/3 of the people repent and return back. So that's the purpose of all of this that's going on. And it just happens that that same year you had that constellation Virgo, and you also had the eclipse that went across the country on Elul 1, which was on the August, that last week of August in 2017, which is also very significant. Those are markers. Those are markers. The Father's marking time with these things. It wasn't by accident. Now, we want to get to the next timeline. I said there's 2 timelines. Okay, the second timeline is the one in Daniel 9, verse 27. He said, I will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Now, we don't know when this 7 weeks ends or begins. We don't know, but it's a week long. And it says in the midst of the week, that's 3.5 years, okay, because each one of those days of the week would represent a year, right? So each one's representing a year. And in the middle would be 3.5 years, right? He causes the obligation to cease and the overspreading of the abomination of desolation. So the abomination of desolations happens in the middle of that 7-year period. Wherever that thing starts or stops, it's in the middle of it. Do y'all all see that? It is in the middle of it. So what is this abomination? And we need to go through that because it explains what it is. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall come, except there'll be a falling away first, that the man of sin be revealed, which is the son of perdition. So he's going to be revealed. All right, verse 4, who opposed and exalts himself above all that is God or that is worship, so that he as God sits in the temple of God. Now that doesn't have to be an actual temple. It also means holy place there. So he sits in a holy place, which is probably either in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, or in that area, or he sits in a place like America, something that the Father is considering a holy place. But then it says, verse 15, Matthew 24, verse 15, when you therefore see the abomination of desolation spoke of by Daniel that we just read, standing in the holy place. Who is standing in the holy place? A man, the son of perdition. Let him see, read, and let him understand. So that abomination of desolations will occur, I think, okay, as the fall of Israel. So all these Christian nations that are going to fall, they are going to be taken down by war, okay? And that will happen, and that is the abomination of desolations, because when this man has taken down Israel, then he can sit in the holy place and he can declare himself ruler of the world, which is what he wants to do. When you go back to Revelation 17, it says he rules over all tongues, kindreds, and nations. So he can't do that until Israel falls. He cannot do that until Israel falls. So this abomination of desolations has to happen in the middle of these 7 years. And it includes the war that takes down Israel. And it includes this man going, sitting in the holy place and declaring himself the king of the universe. Now we're going to get into some things you don't know. The abomination of desolations includes the fall of Israel. That's important for you to know, because if Israel doesn't fall, he can't rule. He has to. And so let's go look at this now. Let's start with the 6 seals. You have the first seal, which is the white horse. I believe that's deception. I see that going on like crazy. The second one is the red horse, that is war. The third one is the black horse, that is inflation and financial problems, right? Then you get to the 4th seal, and it says, I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and he that sat on him was death. Power was given unto him over the 4 parts of the earth, to kill with the sword, hunger, that's famine, death, and beast of the field. So those are the punishments that he's doling out. Now, this is where we are right now, because the other things pretty much have happened. We're having the inflation. It's going to get worse. All 6 of these, all of these seals are pretty much open now, and they just increasing by the day. So you're going to see more war. You're going to see more all of these things that he's mentioning here: famine, death, and beast of the field. All of these things are happening as we speak. So this is nothing new, because these things have been open for a while. Okay. Now, when you get to the next one, which I think we're right at that next one, all the seals are opened at the same time. We want to make that point. And Luke 21:10, let's read this. Then he said unto him, nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. That's one war that he's talking about here. That war that he's talking about is the war between Esau and Jacob. That is the nations in the eastern part of the world coming against the nations in the western part of the world, which are the Christian nations. The great earthquake shall in different places, famine, pestilence, spirit, sights, and great signs shall there be in the heavens. Now watch what he says. Luke says here, 21 verse 12, but before all these, before the kingdom falls, this war happens, before the earthquakes happen, before the famine happens, and this major pestilence happens, before all of those things happen, they shall lay hands on you and persecute you and deliver you up to the synagogue and into the prisons. They're preparing that right now for the people who are unvaccinated. I'm telling you right now, you're preparing to make camps to put people in that are unvaccinated. And many of those are believers being brought before the kings and rulers for my name's sake. So he says, before anything can happen, which really what he's talking about here, what he's describing here, are the trumpets, because the seals are open. The seals are open. Okay, so they're just increasing every day. You can see more deception, more inflation, right? More war, all the things that are mentioned there as the pestilence, all of those things are increasing, right? But he's saying, and he's not going to open the trumpets until this event happens, where they come in, lay hands on you, and put you in prison. Okay, but watch this, and I'm gonna prove this to you. All right, now, this is Revelation 6, verse 9. And when he had opened the 5th seal, okay, I saw, and under the altar, the souls of them that were slain for the word and for the testimony was held. And he cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood? This is something that's happened in the past. Go into verse 11. And the white robes are given to every one of them. And it was said to them that they should rest for a little while, and to their fellow servants and their brethren that should be killed as they were shall be fulfilled. So there's going to be a persecution with the brethren. That's what it's telling you here. And this event, this could happen between 2022, this year, and 2023. We're saying that this event could happen in 2022 and 2023. I mean, that's real close. That is real close. Now, this will lead to the avenge of the Heavenly Father starting. He calls it his year of revenge. He says he's coming for revenge. So why is he coming for revenge? Because they persecuted his saints. They've already started in places like Australia and really Austria and some of these other places. And we're talking about this worldwide, because who knows how many nations are going to be involved in this persecution against the saints. Whether it has anything to do with the vaccine or not, I have no idea. But I do know that I feel like strongly that this thing is coming, because they truly are want to take a hammer to the people now and make them do what they want them to do. So Revelation 6 verse 12, and I behold, when I opened the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake. Now that this has happened and they have persecuted his saints, now that that's how happened, now he is going to go back and do the trumpets. And that's what he's saying. There was a great earthquake. This great earthquake kicks everything off, and it says the sun becomes black as sackcloth, moon becomes as blood. This could be a blood moon. Revelations 8 verse 1, and when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for a short space of time. So there's probably going to be a little after these there's going to be this little time frame where nothing happens, which there's probably a reason for that. And like we said before, these things can't happen until the persecution comes. So everything's waiting for this persecution now. But before all these shall lay hands on you and persecute you and deliver you up and put you in prison. And he said, take no thought about what you're going to say, because I'm going to put the words in your mouth. All right, now here we go. Here's the trumpets. I'm going to bring them all up. All right, the first one, and we don't actually know what these mean, but it's a possibility that they're talking about the same thing we just read in Luke, which is the famine, which is the pestilence, which is the earthquakes, and which is the war. And you can see this. So 1/3 of the trees and 1/3 of the grass, that sounds like a famine. The second one, a mountain falls into the water. We know a mountain is a government. This could be a massive earthquake that caused something to fall into the water. The third, and these could be symbolic. Now, the third is really interesting because it says a star falls, and at the star is called Wormwood, and 1/3 of the water becomes bitter. Now, this is talking about judgment here. These people have already persecuted his saints. So the book of Moses, you have a scenario. So a man could take a woman to the priest, and if he thinks she's committed adultery against him, then she would be fed some bitter water, and if her stomach swells up, and that means she actually was guilty of that. And so if it doesn't swell up, then she's not guilty of that. And so that's was the thing that they did back in that time if a man suspected his wife of adultery. Well, all of these nations, Christian nations, they all have committed adultery, spiritual adultery at this point. And this is their judgment that's talking about here. So who can tell me what time frame that people are judged? What time frame is a nation judged? What time frame is Israel judged? So Does anybody know when that is? That's usually done around atonement. Israel's sins are removed on atonement, and she is judged on atonement. And if you see the pattern of what's happened in the past, many things happened on the 9th of Av, which would have been the night before atonement. And so this is talking about a judgment occurring. This could be a judgment that the Father does on Israel, that they actually have court in the heavens, and she is brought up on charges and she is judged. And that could happen on atonement, and it could happen as early as 2024 or 2023. Okay, now the fourth trumpet, fourth trumpet, a third of part of the sun is smitten, a third part of the moon, and a third part of the stars. So now you have heavenly signs happening. So now it's all these things that were talked about in Luke 21 that we just mentioned are now being played out here. But we know that some of these have symbolism around them. Now, so they may not be fulfilled exactly the way we see, but before these trumpets can happen, these people have to be persecuted first. And that's the realm of everything. Now we get to this next one, which is the fifth one, and that is pestilence. And I'm going to read this to you. Saw a star fall from heaven to the earth. That is always associated, stars falling from heaven to the earth is associated with Satan falling or Hasatan falling. And he's given the key to the bottomless pit, and they let out the locusts on the earth, and go into verse 9, and they're told, don't hurt the grass and the trees, nor any green thing or any tree, but only those men that which have not been sealed. Now, if Israel was just judged that we just talked about, she's been sealed. The ones that are righteous have been sealed at that point. Do y'all understand that? That when the woman was brought before the high priest, which is the Messiah, which is Israel, all of these people are judged, and if she's righteous, she is sealed at that point. So everybody is affected by this particular, and whatever it is, I don't know what this thing is, but it is a definite pestilence of some sort. Now notice that it says it lasts for, in verse 5, it lasts for 5 months, and they're tormented with a scorpion when it strikes a man. That's how the pain feels. So it's something that's very severe, and it says, in those days men shall seek death and shall not find it. So it's going to be a very painful pestilence. Do y'all see that? And some people have said that could be a neutron bomb. It could be just about anything, but it's a form of a pestilence. And so when that happens, it tells you, Revelations 9 verse 12, the first woe has just passed. So once this event happens, the first woe has passed. Now, we want to get to the time. Okay. And Jeremiah 6 verse 1, oh, you children of Benjamin. These are the people that have flint for their foreheads. It's talked about in Ezekiel verse 3. They are solid, and they're not going to move, and they're not going to submit to this Roman type government we have now. Gather yourselves together out of the midst of Jerusalem. This is talking about the fleeing. Blow the trumpet and Tacom, and set up a sign of fire, and an evil appears out of the north, a great destruction. So she is the church, okay, being represented as Benjamin, and she's talked about here in Jeremiah 2 as I likened the daughter of Zion to be a comely and delicate woman. So he's calling her the daughter of Zion. Okay, so that's what he's calling. This is when the flocks are taken into a place of safety. This is what happens, and this has to take place before the evil comes out of the north. Do y'all see that? The evil comes out of the north. So now Jeremiah 6 verse 3, and the shepherd and with his flocks shall come to her. There you go. And they shall pitch their tents round about, and they shall feed everyone in his place. So they're going to go out by churches and flocks. They're going to go into the wilderness. Now, something can drive them out. For instance, they could be driven out by the persecution, right? But they are going to be driven out beforehand, before this destruction comes out of the north. Now we're down to that fifth trumpet here, and we're reading and trying to put this in a time frame. And the woman flees into the wilderness. This is Revelations 12 verse 6, where she has a place prepared by God that he should be fed for 2,203 score days. That's 1,260 days. Okay, so she goes into the wilderness. She has to go into the wilderness before, it tells you right here, before the evil appears out of the north. Do y'all see that? The north is going to be China and Russia. They are in the northern hemisphere. They're the main ones, the ramrods of this. So they're going to be before it strikes Israel. This woman goes into the wilderness. I'm going to show you how she knows when to go. All right, so now the next part in Jeremiah talks about the Antichrist and starting to prepare for war at noon. Now notice this. So Jeremiah, let's just say the woman leaves out in the spring. And if we were just giving a arbitrary date, we would say 2024. She leaves out in the spring of 2024. I'm not setting dates. I'm just trying to help you understand the time flow here. And I'm not saying it's going to happen like this. I'm not setting dates. I'm just trying to show you how this thing could play out. Okay, now watch this. Prepare you for war. Arise, let's go up at noon. Now, we're told that when the spies went into the land, they went in for 40 days. They came out with a bad report about the land of Israel. And so because of that, the Father said, because of 40, you went in for 40 days and you don't want to take the land, I'm going to let you stay in the wilderness the same time, 40 years. So that's where you see that a day can represent a year in Scripture. A day can represent a year. A day can also represent 1,000 years. It depends on how the Father's using this, right? So if we take a daytime period and we break it up in 3 parts, and we say the morning time, the noon time, and the night time, okay? So the morning time would represent the springtime. The noontime would represent when the sun is at its highest point. That would be in the summer. And then the winter time would be represented by the winter. I mean, that would represent the end of the day. And that would be the winter time. So this is just how the Father's trying to use time to let you know when things are going to happen. Now, this man who is the Antichrist, who comes out of the north, look at this, north, it says, prepare you war against her. Now, who is her? That's Israel. Arise and let us go up at noon. Woe unto us. And this is talking to the Israelites. Woe unto us, for the day goes away. The shadows of the evening are stretching out. So he's saying now he's actually gathered his people together and he's beginning to start war. So he's already started his kingdom now. This Antichrist has now started his kingdom. And his kingdom, he can't just pop on the scene all of a sudden. He's got to plan and prepare for this. So he prepares for war 6 months before it happens. Because look at verse 5. Arise, let us go up by night. So night would be the winter time. So he's going to start the war in the winter with Israel. But before he can do that, he has to prepare. So now he's starting in the summertime with his preparation. Do y'all see what I'm talking about here? He's starting with his preparation at the summertime. Now that starts kicking off his time frame because he has 42 months. So let's just say that maybe he even starts sooner than that. Maybe he actually starts in the spring, and that could be possible. But he's definitely going to be doing something and organizing all this Gentile world over here. And does that mean that he goes in to conquer some of these people? I don't know the answer to that. I do know he pulls them together, because it says from every nation in the earth, people come to fight against Israel. So Israel is not Israel in the Middle East. It is the Christian nations in these countries. So he's coming together. He's going to pull his people together. Now think of a possible scenario. He could possibly sit in the UN. I'm not saying he could or he couldn't. He might do that. He might take that position. When he does that, he's going to kick out France, America, and England, because he's not going to have them in it. And so when he starts pulling his armies together, he has to have his people united before he can bring this army into fruition and bring it to our lands. So he's going to be preparing. My guess is at least 6 months out for this war. So now let's go on. So possible dates. Okay. Now it's all going to make a little bit more sense. And we're just saying scenarios here. We're not saying that this is going to be these dates, because the Father never does things the way we think he's going to do them. But let's just say she flees into the wilderness in 2024. So from 2024 in the springtime all the way to 2027 in the fall time would be 1,260 days. Do y'all see that? So she's going to be in protection all that time until the Messiah comes. Do y'all understand that? She's not coming out. She's going to be in protection all that time. Now, the next one, the Antichrist, he has 42 months. Let's say he starts in 2024 at that same time. Now, he's got 42 months. He starts at that same time. Let's say he starts in the springtime of 2024, okay? And he has to fulfill his 42 months also. And that includes that war in there, okay? So the Antichrist comes to power. He has 42 months. Let's say he starts in 2024 and he goes to 2027. Now this thing can slide the way the Father wants it to slide. I'm just trying to put it in perspective so you people could understand how this thing works, okay? How these prophecies are being tied together. Now, let's get to the two witnesses, because they have a time frame. And we start in Revelations 11, verse 3. And I will give power to the two witnesses that they shall prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. So that's 1,260 days. They have the same time frame that Israel has, but they're not on the same sliding scale. And we're going to see that. They don't come on the scene when Israel goes into the wilderness. They do not. I'm going to prove that to you. So when they have finished their testimony, the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and shall kill them. Okay. Now, verse 8, and the dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city. That's going to be Jerusalem, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So there's only one place that the Messiah was crucified, and that was in Jerusalem. So their bodies are going to lay in the street in Jerusalem. They're going to have 1,260 days. And now if you're looking at this as a pattern, now let's look at the next part. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their bodies 3 days and a half, and shall suffer their deadly bodies not to be put in the grave. So their bodies are going to lay in the street for 3.5 days. That is the same pattern that the Messiah was in the grave for 3.5 days. He was in the grave for 3.5 days. They're going to be laying in the street 3.5 days. Is it possible that they die at Passover? I'm just asking. I don't know that that's the case, but it seems very similar. Do y'all see the similarity there? That it's got some of the same symbolism. Is the Father trying to tell you that they die at Passover? I don't know the answer there. Now the church, remember, is still in the wilderness because the Messiah hasn't come yet. So that means the two witnesses die before the church comes out of the wilderness, meaning that the two witnesses are on the scene before the woman goes into the wilderness, because they're given 1,260 days. Are y'all following me? Now notice here, Revelations 11 verse 14, they die at the second woe. When they die, it tells you the second woe is past and the third is coming quickly. So they die at the second woe. All right, so if you understand what I'm saying, the third woe is the 7 last plagues. The 7 last plagues is the third woe. So you have a situation where these two witnesses' work is done, they're cut off, and now comes the rest of the world's punishment because they haven't repented. And that's the last 7 vials. And that's what during this time frame, you know, the man of sin, which is the Antichrist, he's still working, and the woman is still in the wilderness because she's not coming out of the wilderness till the Messiah returns. She doesn't come out of the wilderness until the Messiah returns. So you're seeing that these men are cut off beforehand, which means their 1,260 days have to start before she goes into the wilderness. Now, let me say something here. If they were in the springtime and they died in the springtime, we're using those dates of 2027. If they come to their death in Jerusalem in the springtime around Passover season in 2027, if that's what happens, and you back that up for 1,260 days, they would start their ministry in 2023 in the fall. Now, the Father can slide this, like I said, any way he wants, but he's got to have these men in place before Israel goes into the wilderness. Because, I mean, people are going to constantly be leaving the country, but by the time the masses of the people leave the country, these two witnesses are on the scene, and they probably will tell the woman she needs to leave. Do y'all understand that? That they probably will come in, they might even tell her that she needs to leave. I see them doing that. You know, it's time for you, Benjamin, to flee. They understand Jeremiah 6. If you don't understand Jeremiah 6, you don't understand anything, because it's really giving you all the time frames. These two witnesses, they would start in the fall of 2023, and they would end in the spring of 2027. Do y'all see that? And then there would be a short time after that the vials come on, because it says, soon as the second woe is done and they die, then it says the third woe comes immediately, very quickly. So these 7 last plagues, they last probably for a 7-month period, and then the Messiah returns. And he's got to return Now read my lips. He's got to return on a hog, because you go to Proverbs 7, and it says that the woman is playing the role of the church, and she's also playing the role of Israel. She's a harlot, and she's telling this man, come on in and have love with me, because my husband is going on a long journey and he won't be returning until the hog. So there's only 2 hogs mentioned in Leviticus 23, which talks about the holy days. You have one that happens at Passover, unleavened bread. That's that first holy day in the Feast of Unleavened Bread is a hog. It's labeled as a hog. And then you have the Sukkot, the first day of Sukkot is labeled as a hog. So we're looking at if it was 2027, and I'm just playing this out as, I'm just putting dates in here. That doesn't mean that's the dates that this thing is going to happen. I'm just trying to use examples to show you how this could work. Now, if these 2 men die in the spring of 2027, which would that would mean that you would start in April, May, June, and that would be when the plagues would hit, the last 7 plagues. That is the time called the Day of the Lord. And he would come back by Sukkot. And so that would mean, because he comes back as a hog. So he's definitely in place by the hog. Now, nobody knows the day and the hour, right? But, and that's true. And we certainly don't know the year either. But we do know that these time frames can't change. These time frames, no matter what year it actually falls on, these time frames can't change. And all I'm doing is picking dates to help you see how these time frames work in prophecy. Because the way that it's looking is that these 2 witnesses are on the scene and they die at the end of the second woe, and then the plagues start, and that all happens before the woman comes out of the wilderness. And and that's what you see. So that means these 2 witnesses had to be on the scene at least 6 months before the woman, before the woman goes into the wilderness. Now we're going to go over that again. The church is still in the wilderness. So that means the 2 witnesses die before the church comes out of the wilderness, meaning the 2 witnesses are on the scene before the woman goes into the wilderness. Now, she will gradually go into the wilderness is what I'm thinking. She will gradually go into the wilderness. She'll go into hiding. And so that's going to happen, in a gradual way, probably, because as the persecution heats up, I think she will start looking for a place to hide. Now let's look at this time frame here. Okay, so let's talk now about the last 3.5 years, which we know starts with the abomination of desolations. Now, let's just say that the woman in Revelations 12 goes into the wilderness, and she goes in around 2024. We're just picking an arbitrary date there. And if she goes in, she would go in around that same time that the eclipse happens in that spring of 2024. If that's the case, then you would have the 2 witnesses coming on the scene about 6 months before that, somewhere roughly around that time, because they have to come in sooner. Their time frame is sooner. So let's say they would come in the fall of 2023, and that would happen after Israel was judged in the heavens, and that would probably be on atonement. So these two witnesses would show up, let's just say 2023 in the fall. And they would go, we're told that their ministry lasts for 1,260 days, which if they started in the 2023 in the fall, that would go to the springtime of 2027. And they would die around Passover time. All right, so they have to finish their ministry. And when they finish their ministry, that is the second woe. And when they finish their ministry, then what comes next is the last 7 plagues. And everyone that has not repented by that time will go through those plagues. And so their work is done. And we're saying that they would probably die in the springtime somewhere around Passover, because they're following that same pattern of 3.5 days being dead, just like the Messiah. Okay, so they will also probably be the people that tell the woman who was the church to flee. So if they come on the scene in 2023 in the fall, we're just picking dates randomly here, then the church would flee out in the spring. And she's going to flee about the same time she sees the man of sin. So when she sees the Antichrist, she knows her time is over. She needs to go into the wilderness, because she knows nothing good is going to come when he comes on the scene. Let's just say he comes on the scene at the spring of 2024. Okay. And he's going to chase after her, but she's going to get away from him. We're told that in the book of Revelations, that she goes in the wilderness. He comes after her. That's the persecution that's coming on her, that she's fleeing from. Okay. Now, it says that in Jeremiah 6 that he prepares for war at noon, which would be the summertime. So around noon, he would start preparing for the war. The war would start in the winter. Okay, anytime after the fall, somewhere between the fall and either November, December, January timeframe, that war would start. Now, Israel fell before in the 10th month and 10th day on the Hebrew calendar, which would have been in the month of December. So if that pattern holds, then that's possibility that the war would start in Israel at around that time. Now, that war is with America, and that would go for an entire year. So she would go from the winter time all the way to the fall, because the Father counts his years different. He says the end of the year is at Sukkot. So that's the fall holy day. So if it's at Sukkot, then that means that she would be taken down and she would be sacked from January, December timeframe all the way through to the fall holy day seasons. She would be taken down and sacked. Now, that being the case, it tells you that she goes into captivity during the summer bowl of fruit. So that means her captivity, she'll fall in the wintertime, springtime, and then her captivity would start in the summer. They would start taking the people out of the land and removing them out of the land. Her captivity would start then. Okay. Now, so Israel would be spoiled and fall by 2025. And she's going to go and be taken out because of her sins and her Baal worship, which is looking toward wealth, money, and science. Okay, now, the man of sin has 42 months. So if he starts in the spring of 2024, he would finish by the time of the last plagues in the fall of 2027. That would be when his 42 months are up. Now, he has the same time frame as the woman that goes into the wilderness. He says his is 42 months, hers is 1,260 days. That's the same identical time frame. And so she actually has 3.5 years, and he has 3.5 years. And so from the time he comes on the scene, he's got his 42 months being counted down. Now that can slide depending on where the father starts his 42 months. Now, by the fall, after Israel falls in 2025, in the fall season around Atonement, he would go in and he would declare that he is the ruler of the world at that point. And that's what you see talked about in 2 Thessalonians, where it talks about the man of sin sits in the holy place. The holy place is going to be not a temple, but an actual place. Could be Israel in the Middle East. Okay, now that kind of gives you an understanding. Now we chose dates here, but all of this can slide depending on where the father starts and brings the woman into the wilderness. So, it looks like she's going to go into the wilderness at a certain point, and he knows when. And so all we did here was put it to a timeline so everyone could see how this thing works and what book of Revelations is actually trying to tell us. So now with that, we're going to close and we're going to say blessings to all and good night.